And, Cuban famously blurted out to everybody who would listen that he was still going to be in charge of basketball operations. Breaking news. Just because Mark Cuban says something does not make it true. It didn't work. And then Nico Harrison took advantage of what was a power vacuum.
For weeks now, we've been peeling layer after layer off the Luka Doncic saga, and every time it feels like the story is finally slowing down, boom. A brand new twist pops up and flips the whole thing on its head again. What started as a simple front office mistake has now turned into something far darker, far deeper, and honestly, way more shocking than anyone expected. And just when we thought the Anthony Davis situation was the craziest chapter of this saga, a fresh set of revelations exposed that the Mavericks weren't just dealing with bad basketball decisions, they were caught inside a full-blown power war. Think less NBA front office, and more Game of Thrones with sneakers. This week, new information dropped that completely changes the way we look at everything that's happened in Dallas. Turns out, the franchise wasn't simply mismanaged, it was splintered, divided from the inside, and collapsing under the weight of egos, secret agendas, and personal battles. And at the center of it all, a front office figure who literally called himself the silent assassin. And a power struggle that tore the team apart so violently that it cost the Mavericks the trust of their fan base, their stability, and most importantly, a 26-year-old face of the league. Before diving into the chaos, we need to talk about the night everything quietly began to unravel. Picture this. Dallas has just been blown out in Memphis, another humiliating loss in what was already spiraling into a disastrous season. Everyone's tired, frustrated, mentally drained. It's past midnight. The team plane lands outside Washington, D.C., and they're stuck on the tarmac waiting for delayed buses. By the time they reach their hotel in Georgetown, it's after 3 a.m. Exhaustion everywhere. Frustration everywhere. But despite the darkness surrounding the franchise, there was supposed to be one glimmer of hope. Anthony Davis was expected to return the next day. After all the criticism, after all the noise around the Luka trade, after every finger pointed at the front office, AD's return was supposed to be the moment where the Mavericks could finally breathe again. Except overnight, everything changed. Because for the first time since becoming the controlling owner, Governor Patrick Dumont stepped in and shut the whole thing down. Not based on Nico Harrison's evaluation, not based on AD's personal medical team, but because Dallas's own health and performance director raised a late red flag about a potential catastrophic injury. And that was the moment the truth finally surfaced. AD wasn't the only one listed day to day. So was Nico Harrison's job. 3 days later, he was gone. And the deeper you look, the clearer it becomes. Cuban famously brushed off the sale with one bold line. Nothing's really changed except my bank account. He stood there sweaty from his pregame shooting routine, insisting that the new owners, the Adelson and Dumont families, would handle the business empire, the arena plans, the Vegas-style resort dream. But basketball? That was still his kingdom. Cuban told reporters he'd continue running the Mavericks basketball operations, even though he now owned just 27% of the franchise. But here's where things immediately got strange. Cuban openly admitted that there was no official language in the purchase agreement guaranteeing him any basketball authority. Still, he claimed he would remain the final voice in the room, because that's how the plan had been discussed. Inside the organization, people raised eyebrows. One team source told Tim McMahon that Cuban was overselling himself because he always had a microphone in front of him. And Cuban didn't stop with the media. Minutes later, he gathered the players, coaches, and front office staff and repeated the same message. Nothing changes. I'm still the one running basketball. For Nico Harrison, now in his third year as president of basketball operations and general manager, those words landed like a slap. Multiple staff members found Cuban's comments dismissive, almost belittling. It sounded like he was minimizing the authority of the GM he himself had hired. But beyond the disrespect, there was confusion. One person summed up the entire room's reaction with a single question. Why would someone pay billions for a franchise and then let the old owner keep all the basketball power? A few days later, they got clarity. Patrick Dumont made his first official visit to Dallas and held separate meetings with the business side, the basketball operations staff, and the players. In the basketball ops and player meetings, he was asked straight up about Cuban's claims. Dumont's answer flipped the narrative on its head. Mark is a friend. I'll consult him from time to time. But make no mistake, I am the governor, and I make the decisions. For many in the organization, including Harrison and head coach Jason Kidd, it was a massive relief. They had long been frustrated by Cuban's tendency to meddle in basketball affairs. But Dumont's declaration also created something else, a sudden power vacuum. And Nico Harrison moved instantly to fill it. This is where his Nike background becomes crucial. Harrison spent over 20 years there, rising from field rep to VP of North American basketball operations. And he carried a certain reputation. He once told Cuban he had been nicknamed the silent assassin for his ability to maneuver behind the scenes and get things done without making noise. Sources say Cuban quickly realized he had become Nico's new target. Harrison aligned himself with Dumont using corporate logic, clear command chains, professional structure, streamlined decision-making. The message was simple: I don't want to deal with Mark anymore. He creates chaos. Harrison won Dumont over, especially as the team surged. The Gafford and P.J. Washington trades transformed Dallas late in the season. The Mavs finished with the league's best record over the last 20 games, posted the top defense, and made an improbable finals run. In that moment, Nico could do no wrong. Cuban blamed Harrison, not Dumont, for being pushed out. He even claimed the league prevented a clause that would have allowed him into all basketball meetings. But that clause never gave him any power. It just gave him presence. And Cuban believed presence alone meant control. Meanwhile, Harrison kept tightening his circle, operating directly through Dumont and slowly isolating Cuban from the basketball side altogether. Dumont would sometimes remind Nico Harrison to keep Mark Cuban involved in basketball decisions, and Harrison always nodded, always agreed, and then regularly ignored it. Cuban and Harrison barely communicated at this point. Inside the franchise, people started realizing what was really happening. Harrison wasn't just managing information, he was controlling it. Sources believe that he filtered everything before it reached Dumont. He told his boss what he wanted him to hear, not what Dumont needed to hear as someone new to the NBA world. And because Nico was the only person in basketball operations with direct access to the governor, the entire power structure tilted heavily in his direction. That's how Harrison positioned himself to pull off the unthinkable, convincing Patrick Dumont to trade Luka Doncic. And the method he used explained everything about this power struggle. Harrison didn't frame it as a basketball decision. He framed it as a business decision, speaking Dumont's corporate language. Luka was about to be eligible for a 5-year, $345 million Supermax extension. Harrison insisted it would be a terrible investment. He pointed to Luka's conditioning issues, his off-court habits, and the recurring calf strains. He predicted that Luka's body would eventually break down. And everyone had already seen the viral clip, Luka celebrating the Western Conference championship with a beer, only for Harrison to snatch it out of his hands. Harrison blamed the finals loss to Boston on Luka's defense and pitched a new vision: build an elite defense around Anthony Davis. He'd known AD since his AAU teenage days, and he sold Dumont on the idea with one slogan: defense wins championships. But the most crucial piece? Harrison convinced Dumont that these trade discussions had to stay secret. He warned that if Cuban found out, he'd leak it, and Luka's agent, Bill Duffy, would kill the deal instantly. So the circle stayed tiny. No one else knew, and Dumont bought into that secrecy. From Cuban's perspective, this was madness. He never thought Harrison was qualified to run the franchise alone. Cuban hired him in 2021 to leverage his relationships with players and agents, not to hand him full control. That's why Cuban brought in Dennis Lindsay as a senior advisor in 2023. He believed Harrison needed someone experienced to cover his blind spots. Meanwhile, Harrison blamed Cuban for two major catastrophes: losing Jalen Brunson for nothing and acquiring Christian Wood despite Jason Kidd not wanting him. Several coaches and staff members quietly agreed. Fast forward a few months after the Luka trade, Dallas somehow lucks into the #1 pick and drafts Cooper Flagg. And even though nothing shady was proven, fans were suspicious, and Cuban used the moment to push even harder for Harrison's firing. Harrison didn't help himself either. At Flagg's introductory press conference, he said fortune favors the bold, which infuriated a fan base already traumatized by the Luka decision. Days later, he said he hoped fans were starting to see his vision. They weren't. Dumont even urged him to get media training, but his messaging didn't improve. What really sealed Harrison's fate was roster construction. Cuban warned Dumont in the offseason that the Mavericks had almost no shot creation and would struggle to score. Harrison dismissed it, but the results exposed everything. Dallas ranked second to last in offensive efficiency. Inside the organization, a staff member summed it up perfectly. Nico did one hell of a sales job. He took credit for everything. When Patrick asked how we got Kyrie, how we drafted certain guys, Nico said it was all him. That finals run? Fool's gold. The moment everything crystallized came on November 10th. At halftime of the Bucks game, a fan wearing a Luka Lakers jersey sat next to Dumont and apologized for flipping him off earlier in the season. Dumont admitted he regretted the Luka deal. Hours later, after a brutal collapse and the arena erupting with "Fire Nico" chants, Cuban rushed toward Dumont while Harrison disappeared into the tunnel, a visual symbol of the power balance shifting again. Harrison never sat courtside again after the Luka trade. He was receiving death threats. He watched games from behind the broadcast table using portable stairs to avoid walking through fans. 3 days after the AD tarmac incident, the silent assassin was gone. Fired. And suddenly, Mark Cuban was back in the room. Not as the shot caller, he sold that right for billions, but as a key voice at the table. One source joked, Cuban is floating around in his Skechers right now. He's a consultant, not the boss, but he's definitely back. The Mavericks are now exploring Anthony Davis trades and shifting fully into the Cooper Flag era. Decisions are being made by committee, Michael Finley, Matt Riccardi, Jason Kidd, Cuban, and Dumont all sitting together. The real lesson? This wasn't about bad luck or injuries. It was about power, trust, and what happens when leaders fight for control instead of building structure. Nico isolated Dumont. Cuban clung to authority he no longer owned, and Dumont trusted the wrong voice without checking the facts. In just 9 months, the Mavericks went from finals contenders to a lottery team, all because 3 powerful men thought they knew best.